Good evening, everyone. This is Abhivardhan from Global Law Assembly and ISAIL. And as I had promised, our post Indus Think, so episode 16 with Vakibs, Amey, Anurag Shukla, Vedastala, and all of them, that we will be discussing about decolonizing Indian sovereignty from a perspective of digital technologies. Beyond the rhetoric that, there's some East India company coming up and all of that, we have to think about solutions. So, as I had promised, we have come up with a very interesting session. I want to introduce my members from my organization, the Indian Society of Artificial Intelligence and Law, Mridul Pal Bhattacharya, who is the Deputy Chief Innovation Officer, and Aditi Sharma, the Chief Research Officer of ISAIL. The work that we do in ISAIL is pretty simple. We research on AI policy, we rigorously work on that, and we ensure that people think about these issues from a larger narrative and perspective and not just get into the question of narrative and focus on real policy issues so that solutions can be reached. Because it's not that solutions don't exist, but you can't expect Niti Aayog or the government of India to take every step because, again, lack of policy nuances. I have discussed about this lack of imagination with Ruchir Sharma for Indus Think weeks ago. Watch that episode about Indo-US relations. And if you see, I don't need to comment about the United States because I'm more interested about Bharat. So, Mridul, I give the floor to you so that we begin the discussion. And yeah, you can explain the purpose and everything.
Okay, absolutely. So first off, good evening to the listeners, to the viewers. It's been a long time since we have done an AI Now episode. I believe not a long time, but perhaps a month or two. There's been festivals going all over. Very happy Shubh Deepavali to all of the people who are watching for the Deepavali to come. I would like and as my signature phrase was, "Hello, listeners. We are back with episode 8 of AI Now." Um, so we decided on doing this technical report. We decided on a term of 6 weeks for the finishing of this technical report. And initially, we started out by making preliminary researches. Initially, we started out by charting out a proper course. But then happened was uh, the digging just kept on going on, and therefore we ended up with I believe it's a 46,500 word document, probably, if I'm not wrong. And therefore we have the honor of presenting to you all the Regulatory Sovereignty in India, Indigenizing Competition Technology Approaches technical report. This is one of our first technical reports, and certainly not one of the last, because there are going to be many to come. Now, another thing that is very important, I think, which is absolutely imperative that it be mentioned here, is that we had initially included a lot about corporate governance and corporate law in this particular report, but owing to the extensiveness of this report, we had to decide upon including it in another report that we will do later. So, all of the people, all of the competition law enthusiasts, all of the AI law and policy enthusiasts are absolutely most certainly requested to go through this report, and because it's going to be serving as a preface and perhaps in some time even a groundbreaking project for many more other projects to come, and for many innovations to be made. With all of that in mind, with all of that in the backdrop, I would like to ask Aditi to go forth with the introduction and her parts and all that she has to say. Aditi, if you please.
Thank you, Abhivardhan. So, not just exactly my parts, I would just, like to give a brief introduction about this report. That would be preferable rather than saying all my parts. So, as we all know that AI is an important and emerging field, and so is AI ethics. So, these emerging domain of international technology law are rising steadily, and so are the nuances in the field. So our aim at ISAIL has been to, kind of find the nuances and policy problems in emerging technology. We start by discussing it amongst ourselves first. And once we realize that, yes, there is something that has come to our mind which is important for us to share with the world, we try to come up with a report relating to that issue. This is what happened with us uh, with the topic that we are discussing today. I remember that I was in discussion with Abhivardhan and Mridutpal, and when we were discussing about this issue, our mind kind of stuck to this topic, and that it is a serious problem in the scope of competition technology law approaches in India specifically. So we should think about it, we should write about it, and that is how we came up with the idea of this report. So, if I specifically try to talk about this report, I would say that how India can come up with proper and implementable solutions relating to the problem in the field of competition law, technology law, and both combined together. Um, we have suggested in this report alternatives to current legal and policy framework of algorithmic and information sovereignty in India. And while doing so, we have put a lot of mind into the fact that what we are suggesting is good enough and it is implementable properly with minimal crossroads while implementation. So not just that, we try to compare India's competition law policy with Western countries like United States or other European countries. We have pointed out India's position and reason for its existing state of affairs in competition law, not just in terms of competition law, but also in terms of disruptive techs, information technology, data protection, dispute resolution, information governance, policy adaptation, knowledge economy, and many more related topics. So, as an author who has actively participated in this report, uh, I would like to say that I have put a lot of efforts in this report, and I would really like all the viewers to read it once and understand the levels of pain and hard work that we have put in to publish this piece of work. Yes, it is a lengthy piece of work, but the quality that it entails is also, equilateral to the length of this work. So that is how I would like to introduce this report.
I absolutely agree with you, Aditi. Irrespective of how much of the lens or the volume, sheer volume of the text, the quality is out of the charts. Well, it's very important to point out the parts on coloniality and first principle rights that have been written, because I mean, people all over the world, academic institutions, research organizations, students all over the world are writing a lot about antitrust laws, competition laws. But what is it that we are doing different? And I think these sections are the ones that we are doing different. And I think these are the sections that mark the future, perhaps. Therefore, I would like to ask Abhivardhan sir to go forth with his part.
Thank you so much. So, to the viewers, as I had promised, post in this thing, I'll be discussing about this. Uh, if you remember the discussion I had with Amey and all of those, I had pinpointed page number 113 of the report. So you can go to issue.com, as you can see it right now, slash Indian Society AI. Just look at the recent draft, which is ISAIL TR001, or just find the terms indigenizing, regularizing, and all of that. You can get the report. Go to page number 113. I'm not asking you to read the background. Read the recommendations. Who cares about the background? You all know that. So I don't need to tell you about the background. But thoda sa, I'll recontextualize and re-engineer the background for you. Now, uh, I am not getting on the direct issues of, saying the things that, what Facebook is your East India company of sorts. In some way, it is because that's what private actors do. The concept of the Asia Pacific was like that when the information age came in. The Americans wanted to do it, otherwise, how will they make the soft power empire? It's commonsensical for them to do it. That same digital coloniality was committed through the ByteDance's TikTok, which was not earlier owned by Chinese entities, but it was owned by a European entity because it was musical.ly and then it became TikTok. Okay, so uh, coloniality in digital affairs, what happens is it's about the way how software works. And My friend Sanad Arora, who is a contributing researcher at ISAIL, has actually very exceedingly and very meticulously covered this portion. So, how does it work? Correct? That's the question. Imagine a company. Okay, you start something. You come up with an idea, and you thought, okay, let's inject that idea, make it happen. So, what is a startup? Startup is basically starting something, entrepreneurializing something, being an entrepreneur, creating a product or service makes which goes to the consumers, create a supply demand chain, and creating some relevance of the content or whatever you are creating, whether it is in the service sector like content you create or services you provide, or the manufacturing sector, which is what kind of product are you making. In technology, there are various kinds of products, whether your Amazon Alexa or your heartbeat rating apps, or biometric apps which are actually checking your eye status to tell you whether your retina is fine or not, or any other AI app that you can think of. Okay, you can think of any of them. So what happens is usually companies, and that's what happens with states, that in the information age, governments become inefficient because of many issues, corruption, and everywhere. And it is regardless of coloniality. US became corrupt post Cold War. US lost its credibility. Russia has oligarchs. India had the cartel. India has a very weird politics. You know the Kashmir saga. I don't need to tell you about Article 370. You don't know that. So you know about corruption, conflict economy, the rise and fall of Taliban, and the re-rise of Taliban, right? All of that in the 21st century. What does it show? It shows that the role of the state had decreased and the role of the private actors had increased. Imagine it this way. How did it become easy for Facebook to get so much global coverage? You can watch the Social Network, a film featuring Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook, which was Harvard Connection, or you can understand the way the CIA and the FBI work and how the Americans actually think about these companies. Now, as I asked Ruchir in my last discussion, whether the West always wanted to do like that, I had said a very, very important thing which people must understand, that the question was not to whether this is right or wrong, because that's a different question of applicability. I consider digital coloniality to be a very big blot and a problem for Asian and African societies. And I consider that because it actually reprimands our right, not just to freedom of expression, but even our cultural rights, our economic rights, and other kinds of human rights. But the problem is, since all our originative ideas have come from the West, and since the structure is largely provided by the West, and mind you, had it been a China dominated world, you can also expect that coloniality from China, because the Chinese Communist Party also thinks like that. So you are actually nowhere. You are actually also affected by Americans. You're also affected by the Chinese. That is the reality. Okay. Similar with the Quad. A very noted journalist from First Post has now said very loudly that the US is the weakest link to the Quad. I've been saying that from the day one, and I'm pretty clear on that. And it is because the United States doesn't want to invest in India, nor it wants India-centric approaches. Because my very logical question is, if you balkanize China, what will happen then? What's your next approach for India? You have a big demographic population. What did you do with South Korea? South Koreans are hating their country because of their economic problems. So many ways the problem comes in when you see the role of private actors, you see the role of economy. Now neoliberalism was in a rise, okay? The concept of competition law, which is competition law 2.0, came in with an idea where, consumer welfare matters. Amazon and all of these companies came in, which is the big tech. Problem was, in 2016, Brexit, Donald Trump's election, and all of these things inspired the break of the big tech, in the sense that people started asking questions. Why is the big tech like that? And so if we talk about the Indo-Pacific, we have to be concerned that the Indo-Pacific has to be India-centric and Indo-European. And Indo-European, as I always say, is actually ranging from Indian cooperation to Europe and Indian cooperation to the Far East, which is Prime Minister Modi's policy, the Act East policy. And I like that policy because reaching out to your allies and partners in Southeast Asia is also a very good way for digital cooperation. So Competition Act is not prepared right now to deal with these issues. You can use your regulators like SEBI, ED, RBI, and all of those. You can use the Competition Law Tribunal. You can use the Competition Commission of India. You can try to act against the big tech, but the problem is there's a paper by Vikas Katuria from Observer Research Foundation. He's not in ORF anymore. You can read that paper. It very clearly says that the problem is that you're dealing with the economic pathway and not dealing with the technological and the ontological problem of it. It's also about technology supremacy. Whatever software you make, if you're giving a subscription fee or you're having a dependence on it, you have a cognitive relationship, you have that cohabited relationship with the technology. To dissect that completely, just rip it off and come up with a new one is very difficult to happen. Okay, so coloniality in a digital way is like that. Imagine those times when people used to watch World Cup, and then they used to realize that the content which we are watching is not that much anymore. It does not give us that enthusiasm anymore, right? That rip off which feels is the same problem in competition law, that the issue is that the softwares are designed in such a way. But one thing we have to understand, there's an element of generality also, because the West has been salient. So the West evolved, they came up with better ideas, the Anglos were dominated into it. But why they're declining, that is the main point, because neoliberalism is losing its value. And let me predict it right away. And I'm not a prediction guy, okay, I don't predict. The Chinese companies are also on a decline because they use the same neoliberal model against Americans and Indians. Who invested in films of Hollywood actors? Alibaba. You have Alibaba films, you can watch which films they invested in. Who invested in TikTok? China. Who invested in BRI? China. Now, one the thing is that these actors like Weibo, Alibaba, Alipay, all of these are losing their relevance because the Chinese Communist Party has a different intent for the economic measures. Now, whether they work or not, if Xi Jinping's own imperative, I don't think they will work. So, Americans and Chinese are already seeing a decline. So, strategically, what happens for the Americans is that they have to think on a question very simply: what's the next way? Which is the next market? Now, Netflix, Disney Hotstar, all of these portals find India as the market. So what do you need is to come with a decolonized approach. Okay, but that cannot happen by not changing your constitutional law approaches, by changing your competition law approaches, by changing your technology law approaches. Because the larger problem is you have to think differently and you have to be innovative as well. It's a challenge for you. You are in a global world. You just can't deny yourself. You can't be isolated. Okay, you have Geo, you created a revolution. You have Ola, you have kind of created a revolution in electric vehicles. People may disagree with me. That's the end of the problem. There is an article by Abhijit Mitra, an article or thread by Abhijit Mitra. You can read it. It's on your EVs and their applicability and their value. It's a long thread. You can read it. Fine, but you created something. Then you have also avenues of cooperation when it comes to other forms of energy, like nuclear energy with France. So decolonizing simply means is to find autonomous means. Now, co-op is one of the good ways, but it is not the only way. So the element of coloniality has to be very seriously understood. And it has to be seen from a perspective of innovation. You can defeat the entrepreneurs who actually have become oligarchs of data and algorithms by being an entrepreneur. And when you have the political commercial backing, the government will support you. I mean, who made the vaccines for you? The Covishield one? Cyrus and Adar Poonawalla, private actors. Who helped you in the Bangladesh war? Larsen and Toubro. Who actually supported the Hindu scriptures and made Hindu scriptures popular in India? Gita Press. And accessible also. 15 rupees Bhagavad Gita pocket copy. That's fantastic, right? So that can happen. Who made Indian masales mainstream? Many of them. Okay. So you have examples. Okay. Case studies are there. You can learn from them. I'll discuss about the incompetency of the government, but let Mridutpal ask more questions and deliver also some points, and then I'll come on the main points of the incompetency of the government also. And I'll tell exactly where the incompetency lies. So Mridutpal, over to you.
Well, if we are to talk about competence, I would definitely let you handle the incompetence part of it all. But what I would do is I'm gonna talk about only a few terms which are perhaps necessary to be understood in order to have a total grasping of what exactly we are talking about. So, in today's age, in terms of competition law, in terms of tech law, in terms of whatever law or whatever s- field it may be, something that a term that comes up very often is digital economy. Now, what exactly is a digital economy? Now, a digital economy is basically an umbrella term. It's a blanket term. It's a metaphorical umbrella which basically envelops all markets utilizing digital technology in
Yes.
their operations. It's not just about a singular market. It's never just about quantum computing. It's never just about Amazon's doing retail businesses. It's never about that. It envelops all the markets. Now,
Hmm.
there are a few key features of digital platforms, such as uh, like a variety in terms of markets, social networking sites, search engines, payment systems, digital markets in various ways. They all differ from the traditional or the linear business model. In case of transaction platforms, firms are able to utilize price leverages on both sides of the market, not just one, but on both sides of the market. Now, in comparison to players who operate on one-sided markets and are constrained because of a unidirectional structure of payment. Now, in addition to lower cost, platforms can potentially reach out to a large number of customers in a comparatively shorter frame of time. And this is perhaps where the CCI should indeed step in. In the case of traditional markets, suppliers face the need for coordination with buyers. Whereas in the case of multi-sided markets, coordination is in fact achieved through a platform itself and through the sharing of data. Now, if we are talking about sharing of data, what exactly is data? Who exactly does this data belong to? To us, to the consumers. And therefore, any weak links in terms of the armor of the company that's utilizing the data would be a potential threat to breach of privacy of us. Now, this there is a economic theory called the reciprocal positive externality between two distinct groups, coined by Mr. Bhattacharjee. However, multi-sided markets are not confined within the binds of digital platforms alone. Through the application of the same rationale, newspapers and credit card markets can be understood to be offline multi-sided markets as well. And this is very important. We need to understand that multi-sided markets are not a phenomenon exclusive to digital economies. Now another important term is relevant market. So the relevant concept of relevant market is a very important one in competition law, and it needs to be understood. The relevant market is the filter. It's a basic filter that demarcates the commercial area confined to the boundaries of which a firm or company behaves. When describing relevant markets as an economic concept applied in competition enforcement by authorities, it is imperative that it be borne in mind that the term needs to be interpreted through the lens of law in order to do away with legal ambiguities. Now, the same I believe is defined under Section 2R of the Competition Act of 2002. I'm not going to quote it. There are very, very important tools, very important parameters, rather parametric tests that determine which side of a particular business's competition law approach needs to be focused on by the law enforcement, or rather the competition enforcement community. Such a test is the SSNIP test, small but significant non-transitory increase in price test. Now, what exactly is that? I'm just giving an example of such a test because there are a lot of tests, but it is somewhat important that we get an idea of what are the tests and what is the purpose of such a test. Now, in layman's terms, the SSNIP evaluates whether for a small yet significant price surge, say 5 to 10%, the consumers of a specific product would either shift their choice to another product of the same category, or they would rather stick to this particular product. Take for example, a premium company such as Apple. They are making their own products, But even if their prices go up by 5 to 10%, consumers are never going to shift their choice from Apple, from their preferred choice from Apple to Microsoft or whatever. That's never going to happen. And this is where tests like SSNIP come in order to evaluate how much of the market share has been already converted into a potential monopolization economy. Then obviously, irrespective of the amounts or efficiency of the tests available, inaccuracy in demarcation of the relevant market is one of the most commonplace mistakes made in competition analysis. And I believe Abhivardhan sir will address this as well, so I'm not going to address that. Now, how are the relevant markets to be determined in such a case is a complex problem. In more like every case is a complex problem. A further problematic aspect of two-sided markets, bilateral markets, is that there exist varying groups of consumers on either sides with independent demand and interdependent demand, whereby making the application of an SSNIP test difficult. Because obviously there cannot be an one size fits all test or theory. Thereby, and therefore, while considering the profits in one or both sides of the market and assessing the side on which the hypothetical monopolist would raise its price, becomes a job which is increasingly difficult to do. Now, there are two very essential factors here: dominance and predatory pricing. Dominance is defined under the Section 4 of Competition Act of 2002. Section 4, subsection 1, Section 4, subsection 2, both of them go into details on the same. Predatory pricing is the same, and I think one of the most landmark cases in terms of predatory pricing was AKZO corporate versus commission, where the commission did not conform strictly to the Arida Turner test, and there again we see a test being denied, the credibility of a test in fact being denied. In India, Section 4B of the Competition Act 2002 defines predatory pricing. Now, these are now I believe the document in itself is 48,000 words long, and all of this has been uh, detailed in an excruciating manner, and therefore I believe there's no point in talking about all this or trying to explain or elaborate upon all these things in this episode, at least, because we would never be able to do justice to the conceptualization, to the concepts that we have brought forth in the document itself. So I definitely suggest that go ahead and read the document. Now I'd like to hand over the floor to Vivardhan sir for purposes of all the explanation elaboration that he is going to do, if you please, sir.
Thank you so much. So now what happens is, since I was talking about digital coloniality, one question which everybody asks is, so I said that Amazon, Facebook are multi-sided markets. What does it mean? It's like Ambani. Reliance is invested in various things, right? Geo is not just your SIM wala thing. It's not just in telecom anymore. It is another things, right? It is in collaboration with Savan called Geo Savan. Then it is also investing in other ventures. Reliance also funds the Observer Research Foundation. So it is also in research. This is research and development. The Tata's work with Tata Consultancy Services, TCS. And they also have Tata Click. They also have Tata Motors. They also have Tata Institute of Social Sciences, right? They are everywhere in that sense, right? So it is multifaceted. So monopolies or it's not oligarchy in that sense, but fine, chalo, we can say oligarchies. They're oligarchs in the sense that there are multiple markets per se, and there are multiple market areas where conflation happens. So you can create a situation where if there is an A market which is different from a B market, and somehow there is an intersection, and somehow you get dominance or prominence in both of them, you can manipulate both of the markets. But imagine if there are more than two. How will your economy be affected by a single monopoly? A single monopolistic big giant. Okay? Their foreign companies are very capable to do so. They enter into the domain of public duty. Now, how they do that? So when the COVID pandemic started, Facebook, Twitter, all of these companies stated, we will give you funds for your startups. You want a public health helpline service or something like that, or you want some, not helpline service, but let's say you're tweeting or posting about a particular help for oxygen cylinders or COVID patients on vaccination centers and all of that. We will help you in awareness. Twitter collaborated with the Ministry of Home Affairs, or Home Affairs board now, Health and Family Welfare. Sorry, not Home Affairs, but Health and Family Welfare. So what does it mean? You're contributing into the domain of public duty. Now, of course, people will say the government of India allowed them to do so because it's a good way to encourage, COVID awareness. That's how "jab tak dawai nahi, tab tak kadai nahi" thing came. But coloniality comes in when these structures are actually saying, no, no, we are the only ways how you can extract communication and information economy. And you can't have co-op, you can't have other things, or you just can't have that freedom to make your content available in the way you want. Now, of course, there's a vested agenda and there are soft power elites in the US and UK and all of those countries. I'm not getting on that. You have the podcasts on various issues done by Ruchir and other people. You can watch that. In fact, I'm going to have a very interesting discussion on the New York Times this Sunday by a best-selling author on how the New York Times came into existence and what they have done to the world and not just India, how they're complicit towards China and the US, how they behave accordingly. And I'm going to ask tough questions to the author of a very interesting book. How do they cover the coverage of Indian people, Bangladeshi Hindus, and all of that? I'm not talking about that right now. So decolonization happens when you remove the colonial intent and its first order, second order, third order effects. Simple. How do you do it is the larger question. So I'll tell you the solution. There is no one solution, but there are many solutions. So for example, you have to find an element of indigeneity. Now, what has happened due to globalization, as I talked with Vakib, Zamia, Anurag Shukla, etc., is that indigeneity is needed because indigenous actors will say, we want to create global supply chains which make sense where we are earning money. Now, I'm saying you can't use the developing countries as a fodder for your economic needs in the sense that you are actually creating a monopoly through your digital means, your digital companies, and so forth, while you're actually depriving them of their opportunities to create their own startups and own global supply chains. You let China do that. If you don't let India do it, it's injustice to some extent, while people in international trade law might not agree with me. But I think there India needs to also understand that you cannot counter such actors in the conventional way of merely criticizing them. So when it comes to the incompetency, lack of imagination leads to incompetency. You can't expect the government of India to do everything because the government of India is already busy in things. To simply put it, if anything monumental happens, like Article 370 or CAA or GST, it is a diplomatic and administrative nightmare for the government if it is not planned in that incremental hierarchical fashion. That means you can't expect the government to do everything. Therefore, you have to create a self-regulation. So what is self-regulation? Companies say, we will regulate our employees, our corporate sources, corporate approach like CSR and ESG in our own way. And they have political influence. They can challenge the validity of the positive laws, which positive legal instruments like any statutes approved by the, like an act of parliament, which has been assented by the President of India, or any old law, or any rules and regulations reflected in the Gazette and notified under the Companies Act or anything. They can challenge that. Okay. Ironically, private actors have a very important role to play, and so the Supreme Court will also cooperate with them in some way or the other. So I think it becomes very important and necessary for us to understand that the role of private actors is a very important future for India. And therefore, I'm very hopeful for India. I'm not being negative. This government is doing a great job on that. The only problem is you can't expect creativity from them because the Indian state is like that. So let me talk about some incompetency. So Government of India organized Race 2020 last year. Vakib's told you that in Indus Think, what did they do? They organized it. They never even translated the content that is produced in those conferences, so valuable content on AI ethics, in actually Indic languages. Imagine if people who speak Hindi, Sanskrit, Urdu, and all of those languages, they might have known those things. Are we not expecting them to do something great? The conference happened in October 2020. They could have got the information. They could have contributed to something new. Under the national education policy, you could have done it. Yet you did not. Maybe they are blind spotted. Maybe they're too ignorant about it. Not doing the obvious things. Then there's a lack of interaction. I said that there are only 4 to 5 cities, 4 to 5 areas, in India, like Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Bengaluru. To some extent, these cities, only from where larger representation goes in, there's less true democratic, not electorally, but too democratic by purpose, too democratic by opportunity representation. Therefore, what it means that you need to think about your districts also. Like Telangana came up with its AI ethics approach. Tamil Nadu is trying to come up with its own approach. You can talk about DMK and you can disagree with the DMK politics and everything, but that's a different question. But at least Tamil Nadu is coming up with its own finance strategy. UP should try. Madhya Pradesh should try. Maharashtra should try. And there should be a central approach. There should be a union level approach, of course. There should be a strong central government or union government, whatever you say. I say union government because central government is a colonial term. Always say union government. Now, one thing which is important is that it's a union government issue. But again, if at a district level you're not being creative, your district magistrate is not creative, your municipal corporation doesn't have an idea for technology rejuvenation, maybe through hygiene issues or addressing COVID fears like vaccination issues and all of that, or coming up with any inclusive or interesting idea which is India centric, how will you actually target the things? And then the second expectation which people have, we should incorporate Indian cultural philosophy. But that cannot be done if people don't even understand what the philosophy is, what are the cultural ideas, and how these things work at the first place. So what essentially happens is that the problem is people have to start reading about the Rig Veda and all of the Vedas, the Shrutis and the Smritis and all of those, but they have to understand how to incorporate them into realities. Once people master that, and I'll show you how that works. Give me 1 minute. So here's the thing I'm sharing from the report, page number 113. If you see this, you'll get my point. I've proposed a very important approach, which is to say, just 1 minute, it's getting there. Yeah. So there's something called permeable indigeneity and policy. As the viewers can see it, I'll explain the policy very simply. PIP, which is permeable indigeneity and policy, means your policy or your strategy that you make must be Indian and indigenous. I'm using like sabka saath, sabka vikas, sabka vishwas type of thing, but you might get my catch. What it means, you have to decide a specific subject matter. Ayurveda, constitutional law, media, or I don't know, you know better than me, Carnatic music or Hindustani music, anything that you like, okay, anything that you're interested in. You want reforms. Now here for the competition law, I'll say for technology, you need a specific subject matter. You need a legal approach. You need a policy approach. You have to decide what policy matter it is, what problem it is. And they can be either derived or discovered. Derived means you have to hypothesize a situation and prove it. Or it has to be discoverable. It is something which is in the public domain. You have found some data points to prove it. You have found some information to prove it. And you have to find the information yourself. You have to prove why the information is there. It's not derivation, it's discovery. That can be empirical research, how you do. Now, then you have to apply your thought processes. Okay? You have to see what is the fashion of the experience. What kind of experience are you getting based on which you are actually giving your assertion. It can be amorphous. It can be very rough, tough. It doesn't have to be according to Western standards, but the standards have to be very well made. You can't twist your standards because you have to attain credibility. You are in a globalized world. You have to challenge the standards of globalization of other countries by making a standard of globalization, which is exactly what China did. And that is what you also have to do to challenge China, US, all the countries. Do it, boss. I mean, India has a bigger population. We get into the global supply chains, we did gain dominance, it is our win. So, there what happens is that now this derivation should not be considered, may not be considered indigenous from a point of view whether it is pure cultural origins. What does it mean? As I said in the last podcast, you can't just incorporate a shloka from Bhagavad Gita or Rig Veda and say, you know what, this is a responsible AI ethics strategy. Not possible. Why? Because that's not how it works. Correct? They have their own perpetuity, they have their own concept of understanding of dharma and rita. If you don't understand dharma, rit, how they apply in today's world, how will you come up with ideas? Correct? Many people don't talk about it. Many people talk about abstract ideas. You know what? Just apply everything. Bhagavad Gita is inspirational. Indeed, it is inspirational for human life. But it is a religious philosophy. And therefore, you have to understand how you incorporate ideas. You can, of course, inspire. That is how Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, Sitaram Goyal, and all of those people, you know, who people talk about, wrote things. That is how they innovated. Bal Gangadhar Tilak in jail used to write about the Bhagavad Gita and its philosophy. He innovated from the ideas of dharma and in the Indic conceptions. So it doesn't need to be Puritan. Never come up with a Puritan approach. It's impossible to do so. Nobody does it. Nobody did it in Israel. Nobody did it in China. Nobody did it in Singapore. Ironically, there's a thread by Shrikant Krish on Twitter. You can read it. It shows how the civil services was not a British concept, the IAS thing, the UPSC thing. It was a Chinese concept by Taiwan, the Song dynasty, as people claim. And because the British had a bribery system, kind of, you know, just bribe them or give them some money and get a job. But this standardized idea of a civil service came from China. So somehow it is not colonial. It's inspired from Asia. It is colonial because of the Macaulay influence and, you know, the way the British treated the system, compromised the system, which is why people hate the Indian state. Which means that you need a big state. You need to fill up your vacancies. You need the IAS who are efficient. But you need to remove the element of coloniality because of which you hate it. Now, law and order is one example, but I can tell you many examples into it. So, stay with me. Now, as I said, in the case of policy realism, whether that derivation or discovery, as I said, reflects and even in a real-time scenario, emulates the policy phenomenon, matters. Okay, it's a different case that the phenomenon and the derivation might be related, and the discovery might be related with the distinctive aspects of culture. Just say, people can say you are inspired by some conception of Charak Samhita, and based on that you came up with an app, or you came up with a service or a structure. Now that inspiration can actually come in that way. You don't know, and you can contribute to the global supply chain, the national supply chain, right? You can create your viewers, you can create your viewership, you can create your value. You can monetize it accordingly. So it's a question of deciding your revenue model and all of that. You have to do the background job. And yes, the government is pro startups. Yes, there are still some, you know, tangle issues. The license raj is gone, but there are still issues. But I don't think so. People can't start a venture, right? So then you can't have a reductionist approach also. Reduce. So what does the West do? Okay. So, for example, you must have. So there's a series in Netflix about, you know, apps on genetics. So it's an idea that people just cut off some of part of the hair, they give it to a geneticist, they, you know, trace out the DNA and see who you are more interested in. Okay, and they say, okay, fine. According to genetic relations, you might be, you might love this person more. That is the materialist approach of the West, the liberal approach. But does that help you? No, it exploits you, right? So it's like what Rajiv Malhotra said in his book on AI and the future of power. You are a person. The West uses you to exploit yourself, each of you, every part of you, you know, by exploiting your indriyas, your senses, in every direction through those multifaceted companies, multifaceted ventures. It can be an oligopoly. It can be a monopoly. It can be a duopoly, it can be a tripoly, it can be a quadrupoly, since the word quad is very popular these days. So, How can you use the Indic knowledge systems is your preference. Prove it. It should be scientific, not backed by strawman arguments. Do not come up with strawman arguments. Otherwise, nobody will care about your credibility. Then don't say that Bharat is not being valued, Indians are being mocked. I mean, racism is a different issue because the West sees like that. Not many, but many, still many, not most, but many. And that's a problem. But leave that point. Larger question is uh, how to stop self exploitation, come up with approaches which are, Indic. So there is no reductionist approach. You can't reduce human dignity at that level, which is worse, nor you can have a Puritan approach. It's a bargain. You have to decide that. That is exactly how innovations come in. That is exactly how the world dominates. Everyone contributes to innovation. Indians do, Europeans do, Chinese do. Indians could not do due to their own reasons, but now we can do. And so Indians must think about providing innovation, approaching innovation differently. So, on that, let me get on policy maturity. So, whenever we approach decolonization, there is a substantive problem and there is a procedural problem. Substantive problem: what are the substantive norms which have to be challenged? So, in antitrust, you can see where you have to challenge the cartelized markets. You have to see how they influence you, but you have to make a strategic approach to favor Indian markets. If you sign a free trade agreement, you have to favor Indian markets, provided your Indian markets are influential. You have that influence of Tata and all of those. Of course, not up to that level, but to some extent. And then you say, fine, I have that much influence. Let me get to the government and say, I want to invest in UK. Like Ku invested in Nigeria, okay? Ku came up with its app service in Nigeria while Twitter was banned there. And you know why? The prime minister of president, I don't know, was removed from Ku, or, he was, denied for his whatever he had said. Now, people might disagree, but Ku got its market in Nigeria. So, think about it. You can get your market. Look at the market. We have to be passionate, we have to be passionate as Indians, but we have to be dharmic also. And dharmic means this only. Think about ideas which are salient, which give you a scope, which give you a sense of motivation, hope, and which gives you, a cutting edge approach. And the time is so interesting that actually you can do it. China is falling to some extent. America is in a decline. I mean, this is the best ideal time right now where startups can be made, ventures can be started, creative efforts can be made, and then contribution can be done. And so I now move on to human rights, which is very important. You have to endorse Indic languages. You can't limit yourself to the debate of English and language politics. You have to get on Indic languages. I've discussed that a lot. You can watch the last podcast with me. So let us discuss human rights and practical issues of human rights, not the Western approach, but the Indic approach. So what generally happens with this is that when private companies hyphenate human rights, they get into the domain of privatizing the issue of human rights. If you have a human rights violation, you can go to a court. You can file an FIR, or not FIR for criminal issues, but you can at least go to the police or the executive or the judiciary, correct? Anyhow, for human rights issues. When there are genuine human rights issues, not narrative ones. But in case a social media company or any technology company is causing your economic rights violation, where will you go? People will say they have their community standards, they have their own redressal committee, they have dispute resolution mechanisms of their own. But again, the same question: are the courts capable to handle them? No. So we have to think of coming up with dispute resolutions for consumers as well as companies and governments too, union, and to some extent state if necessary. So in the second report of which a follow-up, we will only cover the recommendation proposals. We'll start with something. We will focus more on the competencies and the limitations of the governments and where companies can contribute. What can the government do? We will not recommend an ideal situation. We will confer a very realistic and practical situation. So, if you see the part which I'm showing, page number 117 to page number 118, you'll find that right centrism, which is, the idea that, right centric approaches should be developed. The role of dharma is very important, and rita is important, I told you. So how that is determined and how that is sought will make the things way easier for you. You have to indigenize your standards instead of canceling it, and that is where it will help you in challenging the universal standards and saying, you know what, whatever universal you want to make, which is J. Deepak always says, give me a seat. And once you do that, the suit will follow. There will be people challenging you, okay? But that doesn't matter. People will challenge because that happens, right? Uh, People who are emerging as historians, they are being mocked just because they are fellows of the Royal Historical Society, but they have done some exceptional work and they must be appreciated. Instead, they were mocked. But still, fine. I mean, they might do it, but that's wrong. So, ironically, you have to de-hyphenate and declutter the way human rights is understood, because it's a first priority medium order risk. Uh, as I said, all of these helplines, all of these support to startups, they are privatizing because incompetency or lack of approach of the Indian state, because it is not a big state. If people say India is a socialist state, the problem is it is actually welfareist, not socialist, because socialism means you have so much control over your people. You don't have control. You're a weak state. That is why when you fail, people are irritated of you. Exactly the point. And it's not just law and order, it can be anything, compliance issues, income tax, anything, right? So that's how the weak states are in developing countries. Read about African countries, read about Asian countries. That's what Afghanistan was, but India is way, way better than Afghanistan and Pakistan, let's be honest. So India is becoming a big state. Okay. The only thing is that India is embracing a laissez-faire approach to some extent, embracing more American companies and Anglophone companies. What I'm trying to say is that that approach might work for investments, but you might not get your critical jobs just merely through American and Anglophone actors. So you should not become the cannon fodder for those things. You should become something which makes sense, and there you have to think about rights-based approaches where you dominate. It is as simple as that. So there also, uh, you have to see what privatization can be prevented, where public law shapes a role. The role of the constitution will come in. You can of course interpret it accordingly. That's a legal question, but I think in policy, as I said, self-regulation is a big thing. Like, for example, let me give an example. uh, any company which has food delivery apps, okay, a food delivery app which is dominant across India can create a market and influence the way food delivery is done. Okay, that can be challenged in a court of law for monopolistic or competition reasons. But if a company has specific commercial influence, that economic and commercial weight and consumer reliability and all of that is the political leverage you get. That is exactly your political leverage. It's not your street mentality, it's your political leverage. Simple as that. Okay? Therefore, you are privatizing economic rights of the people who are running the restaurants. So you can't expect the state to intervene everywhere, because that is also wrong. But you have to also ensure that the private actors do not run riot and actually become mad and actually lose their control. You have to strike not the balance but an adaptive approach, because we actually have to. And that is why I suggest people read Sanjeev Sanyal's works on economics. They are exceedingly amazing. People can watch his lectures. I remember in under the Puranic concept, we have 6 seasons, but we are taught that we have 4 seasons. Ironically, correct? So I think that is where the whole thing comes in, and that is why people have to understand this problem. Now, one more thing which I wish to discuss is that technology law has 3 phases, and this is something which is like a racing car. These 3 phases never end. First is coherentism, where you have your archaic laws which you implement, and you have to ensure that law and order kind of situation, just implement it anyhow, just let the dignity of it come in. That is the old traditional approach. India is not the only country to do so just because of colonialism. Even the West has done like that, and the West is also failing in it. Then is the regulatory instrumentalism, which is you come up with not modern but contemporary regulators which make sense for you, which like environmental regulators, not like the National Green Tribunal, but genuine regulators who cover right policy matters. or any other regulator you desire, okay, in competition or finance or income tax, or maybe a regulator in cryptocurrency in future if it comes in. So regulators are those. Third stage is technocracy. What it means, if you are generally in a situation where you do not comply, like you must have heard, people must have heard about a social credit system in China, that if you violate even by a millisecond certain particular norm which is observed by algorithms in the CCTV camera, you might be deprived of your passport or any special rights, public law rights, legal rights that the government of China provides you. So social credit systems defines your way of life and restricts your way of life. We don't need that in India. So so what do you need is a general approach to see how we can ensure freedom of expression, freedom of all of those. But we have to percolate a federal approach because we are a federal civilization. So we have to think about these things. These three stages will never end, they always exist. And usually, policy experts say all across the world that whether it is any country, there should be between coherency and regulatory instrumentalism, because machines should not rule the world. Humans should do it. Human agency is important. So dharma is also human oriented, right? I mean, Rita is the natural order, dharma is human oriented. How human ethics transforms. You can read the works of G.V. Shiv Kumar, Direct Samanya J on Twitter. You can understand his papers on Shrishti Sthiti Lay on Indic Academy, and you can get the point. Fair enough. So that's the rights-based approach. In dispute resolution, we have not covered enough because we realize that if we provide solutions on arbitration or dispute resolution like conciliation, mediation, it will be too long, and there are so many fine lines into it. Like ESG compliances and CSR, it's a big mess. So we thought that let's cover it in the second report, and we'll come up with them. Uh, so that is where I think we have achieved something in this report. Decolonization is effectively possible, but it's a long run process. Therefore, we can't provide one size fits all solution. We are just saying this is a tool, which is PIP, permeable, indigenity, and all of that in policy. Page number 114 of the report. Look at it, introspect about it, and see what solutions can be created by you. And yes, we are open to take your feedback. So that's what I will say to conclude my portion for now. And Mridutpal, you can ask me specific questions about, decolonization when it comes to Indian digital sovereignty. And I would request Aditi to explain the common law problem, which is how judges are not able to handle the issue. How, let's not say judges, courts. How courts are not able to handle. So Mridutpal, over to you.
Okay. So, with regards to all of the first principle rights perspective, what do you suggest and what do you think is the problem, is an inherent problem in India that is actually hindering the development?
So the problem which is inherent is lack of understanding of the first order, second order effects of whatever rights and duties you enforce, which is basically not understanding how dharma and rata works, how your societies understand. And it doesn't extend to just cultural issues, it also extends to non-cultural and individual issues, which is why you're not able to enforce. Your state is weak. You come up with flaggery notions, flavory notions, useless ideas in law, and then you get into problems, and that affects your economic rights. For example, one simple example before people leave, uh, was TikTok giving you any economic rights? No. People might have been earning a lot, okay? That app was banned. People were so depressed, some committed suicide, some were utterly sad. But that app was not providing you economic rights. So, under international trade law, it was correct of India to ban the app because they cited the national security imperative when the skirmish with the Chinese was going on in Ladakh. And that's why the Indian government was legitimate in international law to do so. It was sovereignty issue, yes. But again, the point is TikTok does not provide you economic rights. TikTok used you to monetize you, exploit you, use your content to actually get everything for free. Okay, they're not charging you anything, correct? So they get your content, your reactions, your artistic expressions for free. Use your date, use your information, train their algorithms for free. There's no compensation for that, isn't it? So they are not providing you economic rights. They are privatizing your economic rights. For example, if somebody gets banned on YouTube, can't they create a video live session on Zoom or anywhere? They can. Cancel culture might be there. I mean, people could not remove Joe Rogan in America, right? They're not also able to remove Dave Chappell's comedy series on Netflix. So, cancel culture is there. But my point is, private companies do not give you economic rights because they actually have come up from their own economic rights, which are manifested by the state. So, you need a big state. But then the private actors will be strategic. They have to think about their national interest in a practical way. And I think we can do it. It's not impossible. I'm very hopeful about India as a country. And I think we can really come up with ideas. And that's why I've decided for Indus Think that we will discuss important policy matters which come up in future, but we will also discuss about this mediocrity of people. We will discuss, successful people who have worked in the Indic fold in various fields, not just India, Indo-European, in music, in arts, in law, in ethics, in philosophy, in entrepreneurship, in Ayurveda. We'll discuss with them what they have done in their lives, why they have done in their lives, what inspiration they get, how people should pursue entrepreneurship. It's better to have practical discussions which give people an insight as to why they are interested in the cause. Because flowery talk doesn't help. So that's my point to make. Rights perspective, we just don't understand. And the rights-duty relationship is something which is inherent in dharma. Because a rights-duty is something which is to dharma. You have a duty towards dharma. Dharma is related to rita, the natural order. And that is how your rights emanate. The right to fulfill a duty. But it is not dogmatic. It is connected with your human life. That is environment also. See how beautifully it is connected. And environment matters. Think about it. So can't you come up with innovative ecological solutions? You can. I always seek infinite possibilities. Instead of saying on a podcast, nothing is possible, I'll say everything is possible. Just think about it. You can think better than me. I am not your antaryami to say I know everything. It's wrong. But my objective of IGP and Indus Think is to basically say, in policy, we can help you, we can direct you, but we are not the arbitrators. We are just saying that, yes, this is one of the best ways. You can create your own best ways. That is also something which is inclusive of the dharmic fold, the Indic fold. That is how you understand Dharma and Nritya. Very interesting idea. I mean, I'm thinking to discuss that with people who are experts in Dharma and Nritya. You can watch my podcast episode with Amrita, and you can watch that and understand the context here. So it's very interesting. I think a lot of hope is there. I'm not going to say there's negative. Decolonization is possible, but it has to be practical. You have to influence the world. You have to come up with a global approach which is truly Indian, because there is no global approach. All global approaches are nationalistic. Because I'll tell you one simple example. British author Simon and Holt, who has been advisor to several diplomats across the world, on my podcast said in his book Good Country Equation that, Abhivardhan, the point is, everybody says there's an international approach, it's a global approach. There's no global approach. You know why? Two examples. When Nazi Germany came in Germany, Hitler was popular in Germany, not in the world. So Nazism was not able to spread in that way. Okay? Even socialism was nationalistic. So Tito in Yugoslavia was very, very antithetical to the Soviets and the Americans. Again, socialism with nationalism. Okay? Chinese nationalism is like that. The industrialists think differently. The CCP and the army people think differently. Ironically, that is also nationalism in other countries. So nationalism is a national conception. Now, how do you use it to create something global is actually a pain, a task, a challenge for the nationals and the nationhood and the nation itself. That is how America copied ideas of other countries, made everything so hunky-dory. America created a narrative all across the world that, we are with you. I as America is the leader of the free world, and Yes, I will help you everywhere. That is what the American narrative has been. And interestingly, that's the case. So, so interestingly, if you understand that, condemnation is good. But beyond condemnation, think creatively. Think about ideas, what you can do. I think I should take more questions. That would be better. People, please ask your questions in the comments. Any questions that you have, I'll address your questions. And Pal, I think you can ask me questions. And yes, we'll come on Aditi's portion on common law, addressing the issues in courts, which is very interesting, actually. So, yeah, go ahead. Ask me questions, important questions.
All right. So I don't think I have any questions for you. I at least don't have any questions for you right now. But obviously, if anyone comments any questions, I think we should take them head on. And maybe Aditi can go forth with the common law portions right now.
I think Aditi should do that because the issue with courts is also very interesting. So, with respect to the honorable courts, we begin. Aditi, go ahead.
Well, the discussion that we had, right now, kind of to conclude, would be that establishing a competition authority by itself does not decipher all the hitches that we have pertaining to the, conception of the competition condition. So, unless there is a strong political will, even the competition and the regulatory authority possibly will not be able to function, properly, is what we tried to highlight in this report in a way. But apart from what we have already discussed, another important part is which I mean, kind of highlighting is reform in common law machinery, specifically in public law and technology law. Just to introduce this topic, innovations in information sciences are essentially focused in a lot of things nowadays, including collecting or processing or analyzing vast amounts of data that have consequences in a wide range of research and development. And rapid progress in information technology, they are kind of transforming the way in which people work, and not just work, they consume, they play, they engage with each other and their environment. This is happening and we cannot ignore this. But on the other hand, the current machinery that is in place today in India is to resolve the problems that arise because of introduction of these uh, problems, we believe is are still old fashioned. Common law mechanisms are something which are still prevalent in India and are generally preferred by the courts. We do not understand why this is so. I mean, I'll highlight one sentence that initially Abhivardhan said, that West evolved, but we did not in a way evolve from decoloniality. So that is essentially what is happening even in judiciary, Indian judiciary specifically. Common law mechanisms are something which are prevalent and they are preferred by the court, and not just in technologically imbibed issue is this the case, but even in cases relating to public law, which even after a lot of decades of independence, uh, our judiciary should be independent of what uh, previously we used to kind of have in that case. But with the advent of these technologies, the public's worry is about numerous dangers that arise when these judgments are made by computers instead of people, and this kind of trend is growing. Truthfully, these worries are legitimate, considering the fact that countries' apprehension in terms of empathizing the people after they are willing to accept these advances and they're implementing even these advances in this current judicial system. So, in this section, what we have tried to highlight is though these worries of the general public is legitimate, there's a solution to it. But before we come to the solution, what is the problem because of which this kind of is happening? is what I'll be highlighting. To begin with, initially there was no harmony when we in any sector, when we come to the decision makers of that sector and the stakeholder of that sector. This harmony came up only when it was suggested that independent regulation is required in every sector, and that independent regulators, the duty of those independent regulator would be to guarantee a level playing field. And after implementing this solution was only the case that harmony was seen between the decision makers and the stakeholders in each and every field. Like, if we take examples of independent regulators that are constituted in sectors like telecommunication or electricity, even in competition sector. So the harmony was only seen when it was realized that there is a need of independent regulation in each and every sector independently. But due to market failures that were prompted by anti competitive actions, or sometimes due to specific technical reasons, the expansion in these sectors were left unregulated. But we cannot leave the sector unregulated because of any reason, being it anti competitive practice or technical failures, to say. So some form of regulation in the market process is required, is what we are trying to say. Sector regulators are important as individual sectors have their own characteristics, which in turn determine the nature of regulation. Let me, give you an example. I'll give an example of telecommunication sector for, just to explain. Now, regulators in telecommunication business have absolute rules regarding the regulation of goods and services in that particular sector, but they didn't exist when these rules were created. Uh, like local telephone companies or long distance firms or international airlines or radio hosts, broadcasting TV companies, all of these things, these are just very unsure. These evolved with the introduction of technology, or when these technologies came into the sector. So when the rules were regulated, or when the rules were provided in early 1990s, these technologies were not that advanced, but the innovation resulted in new multimedia goods, as well as the increasing merging of broadcasting or computer technologies and entertainment. So is the case even in legal sector, so as to say. When it comes to legal jobs specifically, it is now possible for computers to perform some of the legal jobs which was previously inconceivable. Like, it is common for large conflicts to include a large number of papers, papers or a lot of files, and these papers include a large. Uh, these have to be reviewed by young attorneys or paralegals. But now this can be done by a well-taught machine, or automated document drafting is also kind of gaining popularity. Additionally, there are technologies that can anticipate the outcome of conflicts. So these things are happening and we cannot ignore that. Increasingly, we are seeing that computers are taking on duties that we used to believe were exclusively in the domains of attorneys. So the point is that technological developments and product commercialization are intimately linked to government policy and market interactions in today's world. It is impossible for private sectors to create and deploy technology without working in the marketplace and taking public policy into account. Also, for the same reason, it is rare for the governments to be successful in deploying these new technologies to accomplish public goods without working closely with the industries and market participants through new research and development and deploying new kind of phases. So what we suggest that technology must be treated as a distinctive sector altogether, ensuring that the infrastructure is kind of unique to India specifically, and it is not affected by the policy uncertainties which are developed due to information governance or diplomatic relationships. Sector specific regulators must be established to deal with the matters in technology law and regulation. And this is something which is very important, but it is not recognized by the um, government currently. And this is creating a lot of problem in this sector itself. Identifying technology sector as an independent, competition sector as an independent, and its needs are different from each other, and not kind of collaborating everything into one, is something that we need to um, understand, that we need to acknowledge. And only then I think we'll be able to find good solutions to the problem that we are facing today. So that was all briefly what we tried to come up in this part of the report, is all I would like to say.
So, to add on that, since we need sector specific regulators, a larger question which comes in is what kind of sectors disruptive technologies are there, correct? AI is not just one technology, there are many technologies. So, since there are various technologies, an understanding is come up with new actors, start new ventures, think on revenue models, and there you go. You actually have to dominate on self regulation because that is a very good way to instrumentalize and transform sovereignty. Always remember, international organizations only work because of political will of the sovereign states, but they play a role because there are certain subject matter which are of interesting concern. So India can create any international organization. India can be interested in that, and based on the same, it can actually further its agenda. And private companies can say, "ठीक है भैया, I am under you. I can do under you. I have this. I have the blessings of the international body created by India. Let's do it." Or a regional body created by India. Of course, something not like SARC or Quad. Both of them are failures, but something more practical, something more Indo-Pacific, something more Indo-European. And I think that's the key. That's the catch. Sector-specific regulation. Companies come up with self-regulation. They find consensus commercially. They create a political consensus, forcing the governments to come up with an act of parliament, getting things done, assented, creating a foreign policy approach, and thereby promoting Atmanirbhar Bharat. And I think coming actually after Atmanirbhar Bharat to Sashakt Bharat. We have to become more Sashakt and not just Atmanirbhar. Earlier, according to Arvind Pangaria from Niti Ayog, who's not in Niti Ayog anymore, we were self-sufficient. We are now self-reliant. We have to now become self-proactive or self-dependent. So I am more trust in the Sashakti-karan of the Indian talent than the Atmanirbharta, because Atmanirbharta is a thing which you can limit to only one thing, that you know what, we are resilient. But I think the future of the Indo-Pacific is Indian, and it has to be Indian. It cannot be Chinese or American. And please, I don't think so. It is about security arrangements always, because if we actually approach on cybersecurity from a different perspective, I think India can do well. So yes, I am biased towards Indian interests. I'm an Indian national. Why will I not be interested in Indian interests? So, to conclude, this competition law approach is about economic rights and economic empowerment. And we will come up with a follow up report. To say this in a very passionate and honest note, there's a lot hope to approach. Focus on Indic languages, come out of your mediocrity, think about new positive ideas and entrepreneurship ideas. It can be anything. You don't need to start a startup. You can do anything as a proprietorship. You can be an artist. You can do anything. Create a global supply chain, contribute to the global supply chain, become a dominating actor. Think of an app which dominates. You came up with Covin. India came up with Covin. Now it's dominating. It's playing a role. Pfizer is useless. Look at the COVID vaccination cards in UK and US. Useless are they? We came up with Covin. We came up with Covishield. So we can come up with something. Let's do it. And I think that is where create an information economy, create a knowledge economy, dominate. but don't go the way of general companies who just cartelize and utilize the neoliberal model. Come up with a more creative and resilient model. And what is the resilient model is something you have to decide yourself for yourself. So, on this auspicious and positive note, we end this episode of AI Now. I tried to give an insight of the competition law, technology law report. On Saturday, we are going to discuss this issue of cultural salience in Bharatiya civilization, why we need cultural salience. We'll discuss about various examples. Did we miss something out? And if yes, we did, what's the next way? We can't provide one final way, but we can help you in actually finding the tools which can help you in seeing the way you see. Maybe you can create better tools than us. And we are happy to be corrected, right? So, on this auspicious note, Namaste Namova to all. I really am hopeful. I'm excited. And I really wish best for India and the Indian actors. Let's make a self-proactive or self-dependent Bharat, which is not codependent, which is not self-sufficient, which is not just Atmanirbhar anymore, which is thinking beyond Atmanirbharta. And once that happens, we have to work in this decade only, which is 2020 to 2030. You have the youngest population right now, use it. Simple. Just come up with an idea. And I promise, if you mail me at abhivardhan@isil.in or abhivardhan@internationalism.co.in, or you DM me or you message me at my Industhing profile on Twitter, I'll be more than happy to support an entrepreneurial idea from a perspective of discussing it in the podcast. I'm all for endorsing such ideas. Okay? I'll try in future episodes of Industhing to invite such entrepreneurs and positive people who have actually worked in the field and contributed to country as well as themselves and actually made something big out of it. I want to do that, I'll do it. So let's have more positivity. Let's be thinking about a new India, a new republic, which actually is proactive and actually doing something great in the world. Let's create our own global approach. Let's further the cause of Dharma. And with this, we end this session, we end this episode. Namova.